Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Why are real estate sales down? What's a sound real estate investing strategy for you? And then a great guest joins us to discuss your specific mindset, actions, and formulas that help you achieve financial independence today on Get Rich Education. MC Laubscher is the host of the Cashflow Ninja podcast and president of Producers Wealth. He is on a mission to help you achieve financial independence and freedom as soon as possible. He achieves this by integrating the infinite banking concept with real estate investments to increase your returns and recapture cash flow that you are not even aware of that you're losing. MC shares the number one strategy of investors in his holistic wealth creation course at yourownbankingsystem.com.
Learn the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those investment properties. Norada Real Estate saves you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more at passiverealestateinvesting.com and download your free copy of the ultimate guide to passive real estate investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit passiverealestateinvesting.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, and I'm grateful that you're here. But as always, you're not here for me. You're here for you. Let's talk about what's going on in the real estate market and then discuss your investing strategy. Millennials that want to buy homes are still struggling. And why is this? It's because sellers don't want to sell. Sellers don't want to sell because they probably bought their home years ago at a lower interest rate. And now if they sold, they'd have to sell and pay a higher interest rate on the replacement property. Why else can't millennials and others find a home to buy? It's because a lot of times builders still can't feasibly make the economics work to sell to a millennial. That's because the cost of construction is up. Often the timeline to get building permits is longer. The cost of permitting, the cost of labor, the cost of materials are higher. So builders still build higher priced homes out of a millennial's reach. Now, millennials are getting older. I'll tell you how old in a minute. But look, you ask millennials to qualify for a home that's $500,000, $600,000, $700K, $800K. It often just doesn't work. And because it still doesn't work, they need to either become your renter, or if they are your renter, they need to stay your renter. Millennials were born between 1981 and 1996. So to do the math, they're between about age 23 and 38. Now, some organizations like to define their ages a bit differently, but we're going with age 23 to 38 because that's what the Pew Research Center specifically adopted. They're looking to give more structure to these generational nicknames. Yes, I know that you feel that you've heard an awful lot about millennials in the media everywhere, including on this show over the years, but it still matters to track what they do because not only are millennials the largest generation by size, which you probably already knew, but millennials are also the largest generation in the U.S. labor force now. Yeah, millennials aren't kids, they're earning income. So now maybe you wonder why you see in the news that home sales are down in this market or that market, or home sales are down in this price range or that price range. Well, again, if home sales are down, that doesn't necessarily mean that demand has dried up. It might mean that demand is great, but there just isn't any housing inventory to buy. That's the point. That's why sales are down, lack of supply. Real estate can't be flash printed or even mined. That's why it's not just primary residences, but it's what we talk about here more. The lower priced stock that makes good income property, sometimes their sales are even down even as demand goes higher. And that's again due to this chronic lack of inventory. Some income property providers even have a waiting list and some don't have a waiting list. But see, properties can have a wait list. Do stocks have a waiting list? Mutual funds? Do cryptocurrencies have a waiting list? Do dollars have a waiting list? Dollars can just be borrowed into existence. Now, even if you could flash print a habitable property, like with a giant 3D printer, well, you'd still need to own the land underneath it. Plus, there's still some labor component involved. Plus, there's the materials component. Home building always takes materials: cement, glass, copper wire, steel, wood, bricks. That's why there's a waiting list. It is something real. Again, kind of like Kiyosaki and I discussed here last week, own something real. If sales are down in real estate, that's why it could be a very encouraging sign for you, the real estate investor. Now, let's talk about geographic markets for a minute. If you happen to live in the U.S. Midwest and South, let's just say that you do live there and that you don't live in the more populous and pricey coasts, just for this example here. Let's say that if you live in one of those inland markets where the numbers work, Birmingham or Charlotte or Cleveland, Columbus or Memphis or Indiana, or even some of the Florida markets like Jacksonville, Orlando, or Tampa Bay, can you just invest in your backyard then because you're already in one of those investor advantage places and you don't have to invest out of market? Yeah, you can do well there. You might still use a turnkey provider so that you're not the one haggling for your own distressed property on the courthouse steps and then managing your own rehab contractors. But yes, if you already live there in the Midwest and South, sure, you can do well there. But here's my point. Even if you live in the very best market, if you only invest there, then you aren't diversified. It might be good to focus on one strategy, the buy and hold strategy, because it's really hard to do every strategy well, like buy and hold and flipping and wholesaling and Airbnbs. I mean, that would just be crazy. But one buy and hold strategy in multiple markets for diversification, that's the formula. That's something that you can overlay in multiple markets. Because look, just because real estate is stable, that doesn't mean that your portfolio is stable. So it's wise for you to be invested in at least 3 markets for diversification. That's what hedges you against local recessions or a natural disaster or government policy change and other things that could be hard to control. So you help control it by being in 3 or more markets. But you probably don't want to be in more than 5 or 6 markets for a couple reasons. First, it's really hard for you to track and know 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or more markets. And secondly, look, things probably go smoothly on your properties most months, but if you're in more than about 5 markets, that probably means that you're dealing with more than 5 property manager points of contact and monthly manager statements than you would probably want to juggle. So 3, 4, or maybe 5 markets are a reasonable balance of diversification and practicality. A few months before you plan to buy, it's a great idea to get pre-approved with your mortgage company first. Then once that's done, it's fun to fire away and look at your deals. Use whatever mortgage loan company you want to use. I would recommend one that has experience in doing income properties that you don't plan to occupy yourself. If you don't know where to start, just Google Ridge Lending Group, RIDGE. Then when you're pre-approved, you can build up your portfolio in those at least 3 markets. And if you don't know where to go for the properties, you can go to the same place where I buy my properties, where I maintain a list of the best providers and properties at greturnkey.com. Well, today's guest is a strong speaker. He comes with passion, energy, and you've even got to listen closely. You're going to find yourself rewinding some parts because he just has this astounding way of condensing a lot of great information into just a few sentences. Wait until you hear the one defining question that you can ask anybody, where immediately, with the answer to this one question, you'll know if you're dealing with a savvy, abundant investor or a scared or less experienced person. Just one great question. I'm coming to you today from the southern Caribbean island of Bonaire. I was on Aruba yesterday. These are two of the islands that comprise the Netherlands Antilles here in this region of Dutch colonialization in the Caribbean, and Dutch is still spoken here today. Yes, you get these abridged geography lessons from me on this show from time to time, don't you? I love geography, and hey, real estate is location, 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 so there's my justification. We're actually quite close to Venezuela. Some points of these islands are as close as 15 miles away, and you can even see Venezuela from them on a clear day. Some people have asked me if I'm on the Real Estate Guys Investor Summit at Sea Cruise. No, my schedule lined up a week or two later, although I'm actually on some of the very same islands that they visited. It's been almost 3 years since today's guest was here, one of the most prolific speakers in Get Rich Education history, and the entire financial world returns with us straight ahead on Get Rich Education. Finally, Total Control Financial gives you checkbook control of your 401k and IRA money to invest in real estate. It's time to get your retirement money into your own checking account, but you've got to avoid the little-known tax that you'll pay with any self-directed IRA. Instead, it's time for the QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000. For a real estate investor like you seeking an income property loan, go to Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. Over the years, you've heard President Chaley Ridge generously devote her time to you here on the show as a guest. Ridge provides investment property loans in most U.S. states, and you're going to find out how they've helped more people realize their dreams of real estate financial freedom than any other mortgage lender in the entire nation when you get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Ridge Lending Group's president, Chaley Ridge. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And remember, don't quit your daydream.
Today's guest is the founder of Wealth Factory. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and he's personally helped countless business owners and individuals like you create efficient wealth strategies that fit their unique strengths. And you know what? A few months ago, I was doing a book signing in New Orleans, and I only had a few minutes to talk to one of the persons whose book I signed. And they said, Keith, bring Garrett Gunderson back onto your podcast because it's been quite a while. So welcome back to Get Rich Education, Garrett Gunderson.
Hey, thanks for having me again, man. I really look forward to our conversation.
Garrett, talk to us about the importance of net worth. I think a lot of people put that on a pedestal, but put net worth into perspective for us and tell us what net worth is.
I've even seen authors that I highly respect say things like net worth is the most critical measure of wealth, but right. It's not actually the most critical measure of wealth because you could have a lot of net worth and still go bankrupt because net worth is simply looking at the balance sheet and saying, what are your assets minus your liabilities? That's all. That's net worth. But to me, I would take a lower net worth if I had to choose and a lot more cash flow because cash flow relates to the income statement, which the income statement kind of lets us know how effective are we with our balance sheet? Can we capitalize on those assets? Can we manage and address the liabilities properly so that we have recurring revenue and ongoing income coming in? And when you have that, like to me, the magic is when someone's economically independent, when they have enough recurring revenue from their assets or entrepreneurial based income, which is the income that isn't from them being the technician or being on the ground, but from the vision that they have or the processes or the structures or other employees. When that covers your basic expenses and you're, what Kiyosaki would say, out of the rat race, now you have permission to swing for the fences in everything you do. And most people are programmed to think, well, I'm going to save 10% of my money and try to earn 10% on it. And that 10% of 10% is a very, very dangerous and slow track that usually is based and predicated upon trying to build net worth. But if you focus on building the right cash flow to get their foundation handled, you can massively explode your net worth. But more importantly, keep your eye on the ball and increase cash flow, focus on that income statement just as much, if not more. Cash flow is the lifeblood, even if net worth is the muscle. The muscle only has any value when blood's flowing through the body.
That's a great analogy. I think oftentimes really the word is liquidity. And net worth is important, but I don't think it's the ultimate measure because it doesn't say anything about liquidity. One example of a high net worth with low liquidity might be a person that has a lot of equity locked up into properties. Home equity is relatively unsafe. It's illiquid, and its rate of return on its own is absolutely zero. But I really think net worth's greatest crack is potentially illiquidity.
Right. That's where it's dangerous. You get a lot of equity that you don't know how to tap into, or a lot of valuation that looks good on paper. But what happens in a time where there's a recession or a downturn or a cash flow crunch? You might have to liquidate that at a massive discount just to get enough cash to live on. And you could have a lot of net worth, but if it's not producing any cash flow, you either have to continue to work hard for that money to create the cash flow, or you have to liquidate some of that net worth, which now kind of eats it away. I think that net worth is important. It's just not the most important. It's just kind of an indicator if you're moving in the right direction. But ultimately, you want a river of cash flow that gives you permission to really grow, to really build, to know that things are being managed properly, to know if something's not working out, if it's not going well. It's so much more real. It's so much more tangible in many ways.
Net worth doesn't actually pay any bills. Liquid cash flow is what does pay bills and allow you to fund your lifestyle too. So it's not just about meeting obligations. It's about expanding your means, which is really what we all want to do here. And Garrett, you helped us define net worth. It is one's assets, the total sum of all of one's assets, minus the total sum of all of one's liabilities. Hopefully that's a positive number. That would be a positive net worth. The income statement is something different. That is the monthly income minus your monthly obligations, living expenses, servicing your debt, and so on. And it's a very interesting mindset that some people have around debt. I think some people are afraid to sort of take a page out of the wealthy person's playbook, but middle-class people can absolutely do that. Actually, you have a great question that helps differentiate a person, and you can tell whether they're scarce or whether they're abundant and how savvy of an investor they are. It's about the borrowing money at 0% question. Ask that question for us.
I love asking the question of, if I'm willing to lend money and not charge any interest, how much are you willing to take? And most people will say, as much as you're willing to give me, which is a great answer, right? Yeah. And I'll say, how fast do you want to pay me back? And most people say, never, or as slow as possible, which once again is the right answer, because what we're really trying to determine here is your cost of money. Your cost of money is your highest net sustainable rate of return. So it's something that you know you can earn after taxes, after fees, that you know that can last for an extended period of time, not just a flash in the pan because of a really hot market or investment that you find that's kind of a once in a lifetime type of thing, but ultimately is something you can count on for a long period of time. When you know that number, anytime you borrow and you can borrow it for cheaper than that number, then you're out earning, you're outpacing, you're actually growing more wealth that way. Versus most people just thinking, well, anytime I borrow is debt. That's not actually true. If we go back to the definition of net worth, it's basically equity. When there's more assets and liabilities, that's net worth, also known as equity. But when there's more liabilities than assets, that's actually what debt is when we owe more than we have. When we borrow to consume, when we borrow and there's not an asset attached to it, or we have a higher leverage on an asset than what the asset's actually worth, so we couldn't liquidate it and get our money back. So if you borrow money to consume, that's a no-no. That is going to create actual real debt. But if you're borrowing in a place where you still have peace of mind and you can even outperform what it costs to borrow the money with the cash flow you create, or you have a greater asset than what you owe from the borrowing, you're not actually in debt. You're in the opposite. You're in equity. If I could buy a business tomorrow for $100,000 and I need to borrow that $100,000, but the business is truly worth $300,000, I'm $200,000 in equity, yet most of the world is going to say they just went into debt. Yeah. So you got to know your cost of money first and foremost. You've got to realize there's the economics to things, which is, can you out earn what you're being charged? And then there's the peace of mind factor, which is, can you still be left in a place of abundance where you feel like you could be a value creator, produce, you don't get sucked into a scarcity survival mentality, you're not losing sleep over it, so that you could still treat yourself as the greatest asset, because no stock, bond, real estate, financial advisor, or anything that is going to overcome someone being dragged into scarcity, because scarcity destroys wealth. So you're the asset. You make sure to protect your mindset. You look and say, is this a smart borrow based upon who I am? And you know what? You just have a lot more power to understand finance and demystify it if you can start to measure, am I earning more than I pay? And am I sleeping at night? That's pretty simple when we break it down at that level.
Yeah. If I'm willing to lend you money at 0%, how much would you take? I love that question. I think it's a great differentiating question. In fact, I think there are a number of people out there that are misled and they're willing to not take anything. And that's part of a poor mindset. I mean, someone is almost certainly destined to be middle class if that's their mindset, unless they have an incredibly brilliant entrepreneurial idea. Debt makes most people fearful, but the rich know how to use debt. You mentioned the cost of money, which is the interest rate. And Freddie Mac, they began tracking 30-year fixed-rate mortgages in 1971. So we have less than 50 years of data on that. But the average rate is 7.7%. Now, if you have a cash flowing rental, even if that percentage is greater than inflation, well, in a sense, I think you can definitely call that good debt, because in a cash flowing rental, your tenant services that debt for you. They pay the interest. They also pay principal and something extra on top of that called cash flow. But at the everyday consumer credit level, I think a lot of people are fearful about a different kind of debt. Now, even if you have to pay your own debt, let's say you want to buy a car. You could stick all of your money into that car and pay it off and never have any debt on it. Or you might be able to get a car loan for just 3%. So instead you could start thinking, now wait a second, I could use someone else's money to buy the car at 3%, and I could make my own money more productive somewhere else. So I think what you're saying is, in a sense, you're not even in debt here if you have the ability to pay the car off when you want. And then on top of that, a 3% loan, I think you can make the argument that the real rate of inflation could be more than 3%. So effectively, you're getting paid to borrow in this case. What are your thoughts?
The real rate of inflation, let's tackle that for 1 second. If the government says that there's the consumer price index of 3%, that's only part of the story. We also have to consider technological change. There's things that we're buying today that didn't even exist in the past. And even if computers are getting cheaper, they didn't exist in the past. So it may be making it look like there's lowering of inflation, but the reality is we're buying things we didn't even buy before, which is part of that inflationary thing. And then the part of inflation that I think we don't always take into account is our propensity to consume, meaning a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. Do you want to live a higher quality of life as time goes on, or do you want to live the same quality of life that you had 10 years ago or even before? Like, I grew up going to motels, but as soon as I stayed at a 5-star Mandarin Oriental hotel, that changed my mind about what I'm willing to tolerate, right? So I think that there is that part of it. And the loans become more efficient with time simply because inflation means that even if we're paying the same payment on the loan, the dollars are actually worth less in the future because of the inflation. So loans become cheaper over time. So if you have a 30-year mortgage and you've been paying the same payment for 15 years, that payments in the 15th year won't feel as bad as the payments in the first year, simply because the dollar isn't worth as much, which means that loan is actually helping you, not hurting you, if you're earning more than what you borrowed. You got to look at that cost of money to understand it. And for some people, cost of money might be 17% because they have an American Express that they haven't paid off, right? It might not be what they're earning in investments. It might be what they're paying in loan interest. And the best thing they might be able to do is pay that loan off versus go out and leverage a new investment, because it starts to become something that releases that stress. It improves their cash flow. And it goes back to this economic independence factor. Economic independence is where we have enough recurring revenue to cover our basic expenses. We want that coming from assets or from business income that doesn't require our daily involvement. When we're in that place, one of the easiest ways to get there sometimes is to lower the bar, meaning by paying things off, our number goes down that we have to achieve. And so let me give two major resources for this. One is the cash flow index. Our cash flow index is what anytime we're borrowing money, we want to take what is the loan amount and divide it by the minimum monthly payment that's required every month. It's going to spit out a number. So loan balance divided by minimum monthly payment. If that is less than 50, we have a cash hog on our hands, meaning it's a pretty high payment in relationship to a relatively low balance that we borrowed. Awesome cash flow for the bank, not as good for us, right? If it's over 100 when we do that division, it means we have a much more efficient loan. We have a lot more that we've borrowed in relationship to a relatively minimal payment. So with that efficiency, it's actually very beneficial to the economic independence that we're trying to achieve. So if you're ever trying to pay off a loan, pay off the low cash flow index loan first, pay the minimum to everything else, but let's flip it on the other side. You borrow from a bank, that's your cash flow index. But what happens when you take money and you invest it? Now we're going to look at your investment index. Your investment index is how much deposit did you put in that investment? If it's a straight mutual fund, it was 100, like you had to put all the money in there. If it's a loan that you acquire for a piece of property, what was your down payment? You might have a lot more leverage in borrowing money there. But ultimately, we look at how much you put down, and then we divide that by the minimum cash flow that comes in every single month. Now, most retirement plans are going to be a zero. They're not contributing to economic independence along the way. They're tied up till 59 and a half. They're pretty expensive and onerous, and they don't take into consideration much cash flow, if any at all now. Now, on the other hand, maybe you put in $20,000 to a real estate investment that's kicking off, several $100s per month. That's all of a sudden got a really good investment index, because on your investment index, what you're looking at is a low number. A low number means you didn't put in a major deposit. You're getting a decent amount of cash flow, just like the bank looks at you when you're a borrower. They want a low cash flow index. You want a high cash flow index. On the investment side, you want a low investment index because you're the one using your capital now. So if you have really low cash flow indexes and high investment indexes, you're not prepared to be a good investor yet. Pay off your loans. If on the other hand, you have really high cash flow indexes and really low investment indexes, you're going to get to economic independence faster by being an investor and creating more cash flow. When people usually get in the mindset of, I've got to get out of debt, they get in a scarcity thinking, they scrimp, they save, they budget, they reduce. And it's not a game of reduction, it's a game of production if you want to be wealthy.
Right.
No one actually shrinks their way to wealth. But if you're not having good investment indexes, it's time to invest in becoming a better investor. It's time to focus on more what you could do to create much greater cash flows. And until you do, paying those loans off might make sense based upon who you are. And once again, your cost of money compiled or kind of complemented with the cash flow index tool.
I like this. Let's give an example on at least one of these. So first of all, you mentioned the cash flow index. That is one's loan amount divided by their minimum monthly payment. And then the second one is their investment index, which is the down payment divided by the amount of cash flow that yields. Give us an example.
So if we look at the cash flow index example, let's say that you have a second mortgage that's $200,000 and it's requiring, let's just say, $1,000 a month payment. So that's a pretty high cash flow index, right? That's 200. But let's say you have a credit card that you've borrowed $20,000 and it's requiring $1,000 payment. All of a sudden we've got a 20 cash flow index. So that credit card is the same payment for a lot less money. Now on the investment index side, let's say you're putting money into a mutual fund. You put in $100,000. How much cash flow comes off of that? It's usually pretty minuscule because most of it's appreciation, not dividends. The dividends, if they are there, are pretty minuscule and small. So what if you're only getting like $100? You have a ridiculously high investment index. It's just not producing much for you, right? It's well over 100 at that point. So on the other hand, what if you put, $20,000 down on an investment property, and that's kicking off net of all your expenses and costs? Let's say that's creating $300. $20,000 creating $300 per month. That is a great investment index when you do that math. It's awesome, right? You're well below 50. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at below 50 on the investment index, above 100 on the cash flow index for you, the individual. And so you're looking at how productive can you be with the dollars you deploy? How much cash flow can you create? And as you start thinking a lot more about cash flow, then like if someone's close to paying off their home, this is a perfect example, Keith. They're super close. They have an amortized loan. They've been paying 13 years on a 15-year mortgage. The payment hasn't gone down at all, even though once again, we mentioned inflation helps them. Guess what? They probably get, if they only owe $20,000 left, but they're paying $1,200 a month on that mortgage, that's a pretty amazing cash flow for $20,000 is $1,250 a month. $1,250 a month guaranteed. Whereas to go take that $20,000 and leverage it to create that cash flow might take work in the investment world. It might have a little bit of risk involved with it. You might have to really be patient and turn down a lot of deals to be able to find that. So maybe that's the best use of that money for that kind of person in the saver's mentality. But what happens when you have no loans? And then you just have money that you're setting aside to build net worth? Where's the cash flow going to come in? How do you get that cash flow going? And that's where we've got to become much better cash flow investors. How do we become more resourceful? How do we start taking lazy assets or dead assets or equity and capitalize on it to create cash flow. I've had people that have used their credit to finance homes for people, and that person pays them 10% above the payment, and now they have collateral with the property because they became the bank. Or I see, like, I've done licensing of my intellectual property, which I then invest in building the intellectual property, but now I'm licensing it and getting a recurring revenue. That is how I became more of a cash flow investor. Other people are really good with real estate. Other people might be good with tax liens. You've got to figure out, not trying to become a master of all that because you'll be a master of none, but instead become masterful at just a few things. Where are your competencies? Where are your values? Where are your drivers? What is your investor DNA? What is it that you relate to that you understand based upon your unique gifts? And you invest there. Focus, don't diversify. Focus and create cash flow. That will actually create more safety than diversifying into things you don't know, you don't understand, that are too far out of your reach, there's no exit strategy for, that you don't know who the fund managers are. And yet that's what the mainstream media has been telling people to do, is diversify. That's a game where we're playing not to lose, and we've lost a game that we're already playing not to lose from the beginning. Every time when a sports team goes into the playing not to lose mode, they're so at risk of losing that game because everything that got them into the winning mode, they forfeit. And see, I know that if you're playing not to lose, thinking it's going to build wealth, it doesn't. That is not a road to wealth, yet too many people overly diversify, which is diversification, spread themselves thin, never really learn much about money and finance because it feels so complicated, yet all you really need to know is a few things. When it comes to real estate, if you just know fix and flip or residential real estate, you don't have to know about commercial, you don't have to know about fractionalized interest or how to do auctions. When people get themselves spread too thin and they get into too many things, that's where leverage goes wrong. Leverage your gifts, leverage your knowledge, really focus instead of diversify. Like Andrew Carnegie said, he put all of his eggs in one basket and watched it like a hawk. That's the road to wealth. Get good at something and maximizing it, treating it like a business, and having cash flow at the forefront of your mind.
Oh, I love that. And so many people do play not to lose. And you know what? I think there's another group of people that just sit on the sidelines and don't play at all. That might be just as bad or worse than playing not to lose. And what I mean is, I think a lot of people out there, they just love to see money sitting stagnantly in a bank account, even if it's not doing that much and they're not playing. You know, as I've said before, a rich man digs for gold, while a poor man is concerned with the cost of a shovel. If you're concerned with the cost of a shovel and the cost to play, you're going to sit on the sidelines. A lot of people basically have lazy money. So I would just ask the question of a business owner, if you had a lazy employee, how long would you keep employing that employee? Why wouldn't you fire your lazy employee? Just like you should fire your lazy money and get it to work. You have control over that. Or there's even dead money, like money sitting in a bank account that's actually being eroded by inflation. Well, you sure wouldn't pay a dead employee if you were a business owner. So why do you tolerate dead money then?
Yeah. And look, actually, this is crazy. There's a lot of business owners that have employees that are not producing, and they don't do anything about it because they don't like confrontation. Just like we don't like to confront our money issues because it feels overwhelming sometimes. It feels intimidating at other times, or it feels like there's misinformation. But here's where you've got to look at your intuition. This is where you got to go with your gut. This is where you got to be about your investor DNA. And you don't just go do what everyone else is doing, because what everyone else is doing is handing their money aside blindly, waiting for 30 years, hoping it's going to work out. And 98% of the time it fails. When we see people turn 65, 98% of the time they're not economically independent. If they stopped working, they don't have enough cash flow to come in and cover the expenses. Now, I think we need to retire this entire notion and concept of retirement, because then people are completely out of control with their money. The best thing to do is be economically independent and choose into a life that you love. Do things that matter to you, whether that's in business or working inside of some business. But ultimately, what is it that exposes your gifts, your talents, so that you have purpose to live on a day-to-day basis? And when it comes to money, it's a lifestyle. If you don't figure it out, life will always be harder than it needs to be. Cash flow crunches will be inevitable. Risk will be in your life all the time because of what you neglect to address. So where is it that you can truly hone in? Where is it you could focus? What are you reading about anyway? You got to get the fundamentals handled, right? And here's the basics of that. Pay yourself first, build up at least 6 months of liquidity, invest when the opportunities are there, not just automatically. What I would say is rookie investors always stay invested. Pros sit on the sidelines and they pounce when the opportunities are ripe in the things that they know and understand. And then as you start to do that, you just handle How do you transfer risk? Having the right insurances, which you only insure catastrophic things, not inconsequential things. You look for any hidden fees, commissions, non-performing things in your investments, and you eliminate those so it doesn't create drag. You make sure to renegotiate, reallocate, and refinance any of the loans that you have that are either too expensive, or if you have more than one loan, you get the right credit score, you get the right cash flow reporting and collateral. And then finally, you just make sure to protect the downside. Focus and protect the downside. When you have your foundation handled, you got a little bit of safety and liquidity. And when you're leveraging your knowledge and you're utilizing your relationships as much as you're leveraging your money, there's exponential wealth for people. See, there's this thing called the value equation. And if it's people want more money, they've got to figure out two things. Number one, what's their mental capital? Their knowledge, their wisdom, their insights, the tools and strategies. And when we combine that with our relationship capital, mentors, networks, customers, and friends and family, and you name it, like just all the people that we interact with or have a chance to interact with as subscribers or followers or whatever it might be, as we take our mental capital and we solve problems for relationships, we serve those relationships, or we add value to their life, money will be the byproduct because dollars follow value. And the bridge between our mental and relationship capital is business, either the business that we create or the business that we're part of. But you want to create unlimited upside potential so that as you contribute more, you earn more. And that's a game changer around money. And then with the money that you make, take a percentage off the top, set it aside. Build and create more cash flowing assets so it takes the pressure off of what you have to earn or what you have to do, so you get to choose to do it every day. And I'm going to tell you, right there, we've just solved a lot of the game of money in a pretty short period of time.
That's right. Gosh, and there is so much to touch on there. Yeah, I think when it comes to being an investor, when everyone else is doing something, that's probably a sign that I don't want to be doing that something. And that's about the point when I lose interest. And I really like your remarks on retirement. You know, there was a time in my life where I thought retirement, which essentially meant doing nothing, was something desirable, but my mindset's changed somewhat. And I think you're articulating it in a really interesting way. Rather than a person going from an employed life and then later transitioning into retired life, maybe one can think of it as living a life of obligation when they're employed and then transitioning into living a life of choices in what used to be called retirement.
Yeah, well said.
Well, Garrett, you often have a very interesting way of phrasing things that's somewhat different than the way I phrase things. You know, we're all about financially free, beating debt free here, and you're very well aligned with that mindset. So if one of our listeners wants to connect with you and learn more about you and get into your world, which I really suggest, what's the best way for them to do that?
A couple of things. They can go to wealthfactory.com/podcast. because I've created great resources on how to improve cash flow, build the basics of your financial picture, and just keep a lot more of the money you make. Or if they want to figure out how to create a real legacy and pass on money for generations to come without creating entitlement, I have a great book called What Would the Rockefellers Do? They can just send a text to 801-503-9667 and put WWRD, as in What Would the Rockefellers Do, in the headline, in the subject, 801-503-9667. That book will be on me. They can just download it. If they want a copy of it physically, they can cover the shipping and I'll pay for the price of the book.
That's the Wealth Factory's Garrett Gunderson. Thanks so much for coming back on to Get Rich Education. Yeah, great stuff with Garrett. Let's review some of what we learned today. Most people try to save 10% and then earn 10% on that 10%. That's an interesting way to think about it, and that is not going to work because 10% of 10% is only a 1% investment gain per year as a proportion of your income. Have a bit of a cash cushion so you don't get sucked into survival mode and scarcity, because then you're incapable of making decisions that can lead to greater wealth. On the investment index that Garrett mentioned, mutual funds fail. And a lot of stocks do too, because where in the heck does your income come from after all? Thanks to Garrett Gunderson for today. Check out the Wealth Factory. And I've got some great news for you about Garrett and Get Rich Education. He's already agreed to come back in the very near future, this time, the next month or two. I love some of the conversations that I have here with Garrett. You have been listening to the show that's created more financial freedom for busy people just like you than nearly any show in the world. So a big thanks here to Team GRE. It's not just me. So for Get Rich Education's creator, me, producer, me, sound engineer, Bidrin Jampo, web designer, Nikon Roy, business developers, John Collins and Marcus Whalen, I'm so grateful that all four of them have been here with me since basically the beginning back in 2014. Thanks to our guest booker, Amber Bell. They have all been A1 from day one. I'm your mere host, Keith Weinhold. Financially free beats debt free, and don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
Countless investors get killed on their long-term maintenance costs in their rental property portfolio, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about my friends at JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model that allows clients like you to invest in new construction, turnkey rental property. That's why JWB has been featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and other national media. If you want new construction rental properties in your portfolio, talk to JWB. Give them a call at 904-677-6777 or visit them at newconstructionturnkey.com. The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.